was to first give you an overview of the whole graduate school process. Second, talk about the timeline of application I followed that you may adapt for yourselves. Third, how to actually go about shortlisting programs. Fourth, writing out your application material, which is your resume, your statements of purpose, and your letters of recommendation. And once you have all of that material and any extra prompts for specific graduate schools in order, I wanted to talk about the fourth component of your process, which is your interviews that will happen later on, and post that, how to finally decide on your grad school in the case that you have multiple offers, and maybe conclude with how to manage your schedule and nerves through this whole process, because honestly, it's a nerve-wracking process. So, I mean, we can, I think if it's possible, like Roshini could share her slides and we could both talk with her slides and you guys can ask questions in between. Roshini, does that work?
Actually, I have animations and I think I might lose the flow. So, because
okay.
So you can go ahead and then I'll probably go ahead after you.
Okay, that also sounds good. So let's start with the first thing, which is the graduate school application process. So, what I want to tell you guys when you're at the outset starting this process is that the odds of applying to any program abroad, be it in the US, be it in Europe, being in other places, as an international student means that your odds are not great. That doesn't mean it can't be done, but it's just that the process will also have a lot of randomness involved. So as an international student, you're probably going to make up 20 to 30% of the size of your cohort. And your cohort size can on average vary from 2 to 3 people in a program to maybe 30 people maximum in a program. So it's just that graduate schools are kind of small and they don't take in that many students. So, I just want you to keep that in mind as you go through this whole application process. So with that background about grad school, I want to talk about the timeline of applications. So if you look at the timeline, it depends on the programs that you're considering. So I think we can mostly take the example of US and Europe because I think that's what a lot of you are aiming for. If you're looking at other places, please put it on the chat or we can talk about it, but I don't think I have any specific insights about any other places. So for the US system, your applications are due in December. Typically December 1st, but some mid-December when you talk about PhDs. And if you're talking about masters, then the deadlines start from end December to Jan, and some even stretch out later. And your process is in two parts. So you first have your submission, an online submission, which will be the December to May part, December to Feb part, and if your application is shortlisted in the second level, you will have your interview that you're called for. So focus on the first part now, which is the application part. So all of these applications are online. You have to pay for them, and you can get waivers for some of them, and we can talk more about the financial aspect of it. But as a broad overview, you should basically start assembling all the necessary material that you have to submit them by December. And this necessary material can be boiled down to three basic things: your resume, your statement of purpose, and your letters of recommendation. So of these, your letters of recommendation is something that has a great deal of sway, but it's also something that's basically already cooked. So you can only get your letters of recommendation from the people that you've already worked with. I was talking about LORs. So if you're applying for graduate school this year, it means your LORs are already out of control. meaning that the kind of people you can get your LORs from is basically decided. It's a function of people you've done research with, hopefully. So ideally, your LOR should be from people you worked with for a good deal of time, and these people are very important because they can talk about the fact that you've done research and demonstrate the fact that you have what it takes to go into graduate school. And so um, what you can do here is be on top of your recommenders. So, you ideally need three recommenders for most programs. In some cases, it's two, and some programs allow you to have more than three recommenders, but three is usually enough. And these can be, as I said, people you've interned with, done work with. So, even if you haven't started anything else, you should ask your letters of recommenders ahead of time so that they can be prepared. And, it's already a good idea to, broach the idea of getting LORs from them in September, in October, so that when you're doing your applications in December, they're not surprised. And they have a good period of at least 2 months. 1 month is sufficient, but 2 months is ideal for them to write out a good letter of recommendation. And you can include prompts when you ask these people. So, if you have any specific examples you want them to include, if you feel like you want them to highlight any particular aspects of your research or something about your work. This is also a great way to make up for any deficiencies that you find in your application. So, for example, if you're applying to a biophysics program and you're worried about your biophysics course grade, then, it would be helpful if your LOI recommender can stress on the fact that, maybe they had some slip ups in courses, but they actually managed to pull off great research projects, which is what counts. And, they can do this kind of research and they're very interested in it. So things like that really make a difference. So I think that's an overview about LORs. So second, I want to talk about your resumes. So I think overall, when you look at a resume for graduate school, your most important component is your research projects. And ideally, when you format your resume, you want to write about these different research projects in a way that you can quantify what you achieved. So, and this can be not only in terms of results, but in terms of potential methodologies that you've learned so that you can demonstrate skills. So when you're drafting your resume, your first potential section is your academic qualifications, your CGPA, which people typically include, and you can also include your CGPA in a specialization if you have one and you're applying to such programs. And second is your research experience, and you can format this ideally chronologically. Don't tile it in importance of a specific experience. I think chronological would be good. A third section on any kind of presentations that you've done. You can also include course projects if there's any course project that you're proud of. And ideally, your CV can be 1 to 2 pages. 2 pages is fine. I don't think any programs have specific cutoffs for CVs, and even if it's there, it's usually two. And I think that's an overview of what kind of content you can put into your resume. And I would advise all of you to get your resumes looked at by seniors, by your batchmates, and by anyone else. And next, I want to talk about your statements of purposes, but I feel like I've just been talking for a while. So, if you have any specific questions about anything, you can please feel free to interject. Make this more like a conversation and less like a monologue, because I don't know, I just don't want to be talking at you.
Hi, I
Hi.
have one quick question.
Yes.
So you mentioned getting resume checked with friends, people, and batchmates, right? So
Yeah.
do you sort of recommend the kind of people I choose to check my resume? Would it depend on the program or? do I just ask everyone?
So I think it would depend on both things. Like it would be helpful if you can get it reviewed by people who applied to similar programs. So, these could be seniors, people in the labs you're working with, um, people outside, but it's also maybe helpful to get a general perspective from your friends, just in terms of whether what you've written makes sense. Is it kind of accessible to someone who is not working on like the exact project in the exact field? Because your applications and your resumes are going to be looked at by people in a committee, and people on that committee could do like a wide range of research. So whatever you write should ideally be accessible to all these people. So it can't hurt to get it reviewed by more people. But I would say, even when you get it reviewed, like you don't have to take all the advice people give. Like you should consider their inputs and finally take a call on what makes sense to you to present your work and how you're communicating it. Because as long as you're getting across the point, I think that's fair. Does that make sense?
Yep, it does. Thank you.
Cool. Anything else? Sure. Um, so the third component I want to talk about is your statement of purpose. And before we like jump into looking at your statement of purpose, it's intrinsically tied to the programs that you choose. So this is going to sound a bit circular, like excuse me. Um, so we're going to do a detour and we're going to talk about how you should go about picking programs. I don't think there's any one way to do it or like any one size fits all answer, because there are so many programs in so many universities. And I think at first glance, it can be very easy to just say that you want to apply to ABC universities because their brand is so great, and that's totally a fair way to do it. And you sh- you can definitely start there. But when it comes to graduate school, more than like the brand of the school, it's the brand of the lab that matters, and how good a fit the program and the lab are for you. So it's really important that you check out a lot of websites. So, you can start by cities. You can start by wherever you feel comfortable going, where you think people in your field of work. You can start by asking your internship professors or profs in Insti where what kind of programs might be a good fit for you. And once you start collecting this information, you can see what exactly your subdomain in terms of programs is. For some people, it's really clear, because if you're interested in neuroscience, there are lots of neuroscience programs, or there are umbrella programs, which are basically large biological sciences programs, which have like a neuroscience niche. But if you're like a computational person, and you're going, should I go into bioinformatics programs? Should I go into computational biology programs? Should I go into like a general molecular and cell biology program? That answer may not be so easy. And what you should do is definitely look at all of the programs and try to not go in from the specific program perspective, but from the specific lab or PI perspective. So like a way I like to do this is sometimes I just Google for random conferences in my areas of interest, and then I see the kind of people who've presented. Like I look at the trainees, I look at what kind of labs they're from, and then I go look at the PIs, and then I go look at the programs that they're affiliated with, and then I stalk the specific programs. So it can be hard to evaluate whether a program is a good fit for you, but a rule of thumb is that you should be excited to work with at least 3 faculty members who are affiliated with that program. So, if you're looking at any school and there are at least 3, hopefully more people you're interested in working with, then I would say that that program is probably a nice place to apply to. And the advantage of doing that is that a lot of schools have departments or groups of 5, 6, 7, 8 labs that
work in concert on topics that are complementary to each other, which means that you really have systems of support to collaborate more. You can do projects that have multiple PIs, and the opportunities there are greater for your field. So, finding that kind of scientific environment can be very important. And the second component of finding that a scientific environment is looking at your specific PIs. So, while you need not know who you specifically want to work with already, it's important to try to evaluate whether those specific PIs look like they might be a good fit for you. And this could be in terms of the number of students that they have in their lab. Is it too big? Is it too small? Would you like to be someone working on a project where you're working under a postdoc maybe, or someone in a lab where you're given free reign of absolutely everything you want to do? So there are lots of different factors that you can consider, but I think it's best to just get started and make a long list of all potential graduate school programs that interest you and keep eliminating schools along the way until you have a reasonable list of maybe 10 to 15 schools to apply to. And you're not really constrained by anything much when it comes to applying to schools, except that your LORs are probably limited, and it's also quite expensive to spend on so many applications. So, I think the sweet spot people do is usually 7 to 10, but you can stretch it if you're a more anxious person. And I think it totally depends upon you. And the graduate schools that you pick and the PIs that you want to work with will, in fact, be the most important component of your statement of purpose. So, you know, in general, your statement of purpose is a document where you talk all about why a specific graduate school is a fit for you, why you want to go to graduate school, what you hope to achieve from going to graduate school, what kind of projects you'd like to work on, and basically a testament to why that program should be, shelling out at least 40K, 35 to 40K in stipend for you for a year, you know? So they're making a big financial investment in you, and they want to know that, you're going to be a good student who works in a lab, and you have what it takes to do that kind of research, keep yourself motivated over the years. And a lot of this is going to be derived from this one document, your statement of purpose. So before I go into how you can craft your SOPs, etc., does anyone else have questions here? Okay, I'm gonna wait for 30 more seconds. You can also type out your questions if you don't want to talk.
Hey, Sankalpa, can we have the Q&A at the end of the presentations? I think that way it will be faster to finish. I think it'll take...
Yeah, sure. Of course. So, okay, then I'll just jump into potentially how you could structure your statement of purpose. So, a good way to do it is to keep in mind that your statement of purpose is not a retelling of your resume. So, every single project you've worked on, all your research experiences, all your course projects, it does not have to go into your SOP. Your SOP has to be a story of you, and it has to be a compelling narrative as to why you, this person, from IITM or wants to go into this specific graduate school. And a convincing way to structure this narrative is to tie in all your previous experiences into it. So, can you draw a line between how you first got into research, your initial research experiences, to, your master's thesis, your final year projects, how all of that built your interest in a specific topic, in a specific program, and why you want to go to graduate school to study that topic further. And if you have any ideas about what kind of projects you want to work on, who you want to work with, you talk about that, and then you conclude by your future goals. So, going to graduate school will maybe enable you to or become an industry researcher. Maybe you want to become a founder in the biotech startup space. So traditionally people say that they want to do grad school to go into academia, but recently there have been enough and more people who go into graduate school to do industrial research. So it's okay if you want to be a bench scientist in the industry and you know that already, but as long as it ties in with the context of your goals and your reason for going to grad school is strong enough, then I think that ties together the whole narrative. But in this, the real finger is mentioning the kind of crops and the projects that you want to work on. So, people usually include like the three PIs that you're interested in working with, and, sort of craft the statement of purpose around this. And ideally, you should do it in a way that, you're going to be applying to a lot of programs, maybe 7, maybe 10, maybe 15. So, within these programs, you're maybe subbing out 1 or 2 paragraphs where you're talking about your fit for that school, and you're talking about the kind of people that you want to interact with. And when you talk about your fit for a specific graduate program, it's helpful to mention resources that they have. Do they have a cool bioimaging facility? Are you interested in bioimage analysis? So that would be useful. Do they have like an immunology network of so and so collaboration? Do they have a specific NSF funded center for something? So, looking out for those details and doing all that stalking beforehand of various department resources, etc., is really going to make your SOP stand out and give an idea of like why you specifically want to go to that program, because all programs want to feel wanted. They don't want to feel like they're your safety school or something. And I'm just going to tie up this conversation by saying that when you pick your graduate schools, I personally didn't believe in picking safety schools. I just picked all the places where I thought I would be happy to go to grad school. And I know that some people, like the idea of thinking of elite schools and safety schools. So, it's up to you how you want to think about it. But it would be good for you to figure out whether your chances at a school are better than at other schools. And again, this is a function of your cohort size. If it's a program that takes in only one international student a year, it's going to be very hard for you to get it. And it's not a function of you being like anything less than amazing. It just has to do with the mathematics of the number of applicants they have, and the kind of resources or the kind of exposure other people have had to such things. So there could be some schools where your odds are higher and some schools where your odds are lower, and maybe that's another factor for you to keep in mind when you apply to programs. And this varies across US programs and Europe programs. And I think that gives us an overview of all the application material, all the graduates, how to like go about choosing a grad program, and some things to keep in mind. So all of this in the timeline of things will basically wrap up by December. And from December to March, you'll start getting back interview calls, and you'll have various types of interviews with PIs. These could be 20-minute interviews and these could be 1 hour interviews. And, we can talk more about the interview process later, but basically that's the second component that you'll have to prepare for. Following which you'll have to take a decision if it's the US by April. So they have a common grad school app deadline day where you have to send in you have to reject all other programs except the one you're choosing by then. And that's the overview. And maybe if I have a minute more, I'll just say that it's absolutely a nerve-wracking process, and it takes a lot because you have to introspect so much. Like, why do you deserve to go to this grad school? Why should they pay to take you? And all of that introspection can get a bit impostery. At least I was always like, oh, does the school really want to take me? Oh, can I actually do this kind of work? And For this, I would absolutely recommend that you go through your grad school application with your friends, with like people you trust, so that all of you can maybe vent about it, talk about the process, get inputs from each other, and also try to maximize all your chances by not applying to the exact same programs, but figure out your 10 programs to be kind of mutually exclusive from each other. So all of you end up with a positive outcome. So I think I've spoken a lot, and maybe I'll hand it to Roshni now to go over her slides, and we'll both take questions at the end together.
You're able to see my screen, right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, cool. So, yeah, let's start. Yeah, so hello everyone, I'm Roshini. So I'll be joining the Biomedical Engineering PhD program at University of California, Davis next month. So Sankalpa has already given you a lot of points. So some of the points might be repetitive in my slides, but nevertheless I'll go through them because they're on my slides. Okay. So some things that you would want to consider before doing a PhD. So I think it's really important to ponder on these, on your thoughts and really decide what you want. The first is your research interest. You need to be really passionate and committed to your research, and you really want to discover something new and contribute something novel to the field. So if that's if that's something that you aim for, you should definitely go for a PhD. Next, it's also the family support that comes into play. So a PhD is a long program, so it's like going to be 4 to 5 years, and you're not going to earn a lot immediately after your undergrad. So you might earn just enough to support yourself, and obviously once you complete your PhD, you have a lot more options, be it in academia or industry. But during that 4-5 year period, if earning immediately after undergrad is not the major thing, and your family should be willing to support you, and you'll be away from your family for so long, so that's something else to consider. Also your future goals, which I'll come to when you're choosing a master's versus a PhD. So this is something that hits everyone to go for a master's or for a PhD. So you can talk to different people who have done a master's and also who are doing a PhD in those particular programs to see where you deem fit. But first, the major points would be to look at your career goals. So if you're someone who wants to become a prof, a research scientist in one of these top industrial fields, and they demand all of these demand you to have a PhD. Whereas if you want to go towards, say, more industrial work where you don't need a PhD, also maybe startup space or entrepreneurship, maybe you can do an MS. So these are some things. Next is the cost. So an MS, generally you don't get funding for MS. It can be a really expensive course. You need to have a good investment, and your family should be able to support you if you're not going to get funded. Whereas a PhD is generally fully funded, and you get a stipend in addition. So that's another thing that you should consider. Next is the time investment. So an MS can be completed within 2 years, whereas a PhD can go up to 4 to 5 years. So that's another factor. Next is the different types of master's programs. So if you're someone looking to apply for master's, like be very specific in the type of master's you're applying. So when I went through these websites, they have a Master of Engineering, and then they have Master of Science in Coursework without a thesis dissertation, and then they have masters which have a research base. So generally these masters of which have a coursework, there can be even a 1-year master's program, and typically they're just money laundering. They don't offer you any TA-ship, or you need to pay for the coursework. Whereas a research-based master's is helpful if, say, you want to go for a PhD later, but you're not sure, and you want to switch off. You're just done a BTech, and you want to go into, say, explore some more in that field. Then you want to decide later if you want to go for a PhD. Then you should do a MS in research. And again, generally MS in research, they do offer TA-ship, paraship, but again, you need to find out from that program if MS students do receive some sort of funding in their second year at least. So that can happen. And then is also if you want to, say, go into another subfield. So for example, you're a bioscience student and you want to specialize in computational biology, and you have enough research experience, but then you again want to learn more and explore that particular field, say computational biology, or you want to do computer science, MS computer science, or MS data science, or say MS in biomedical engineering before thinking of doing a PhD. So that's something else. So that's another point to consider if you want to do an MS before a PhD. So, or even biostatistics, or so there are slightly different fields from your main BTech field. So that's another option. And yeah, so if you want to gain more academic research and experience in MS, and then go for a PhD, or perhaps you're still not sure, and then maybe you want to go to industry, and then you choose an MS. So these are some things that you should consider before picking an MS versus a PhD. So next, this is a very common question, and whether to sit for placements or apply to grad school. So I think it's entirely dependent on you. So I know people who have done both and just are done either of the one. So if you're at this moment not sure, you feel your application to graduate school might not be that strong, or say you want to work in a startup, or you want to be an entrepreneur, you can obviously sit for placements, or go into those startup fields, or you want to take a gap, work for 3 years, and then apply to graduate school. So all of these things are okay. So, and anything is what is best for you, you need to do that. So, but if you're someone who really wants to do a PhD right now, you're very interested in your research, I'd say sitting for placements right now might not, and you have like really good research experience, and you're sure you are going to get into an MS or PhD. Sitting into the placement process might not really be worth of your time, because both the processes are a lot of very time consuming, and you also need good LORs. So typically, you will also, if you're a DDP, dual degree student, you'll have your master's project. So your master's project, your professor will be giving you an LOR. So if you do too many things in that particular SEM, your LOR might suffer. So that's another thing to consider. So personally, for me, I was pretty sure at the end of 4th year that I did not want to work after 5 years. I wanted to do research. So that was I was pretty confident about that. So, but then I still looked at the industrial job options available for me. So I did see the biomedical engineering space. So at least the Medtronic, some of the companies like Philips, Medtronic, G Healthcare, and Stryker, and all of these, they did have options to join immediately after undergrad. But some of the senior scientist positions, they did require you to have a PhD. And then I felt like I should continue doing my research, because that's something that I enjoy. Of course, it can be frustrating, things don't work, but then at the end of the day, if it makes you happy, you should go for it. So finally, the take-home message is, do what you feel is best for you. It's your choice. So it's how you manage your time through this process, and what you feel is right for you. So don't be biased. You should know what others do. You should know what is good for you, and take that step. So now coming to the application process, so I've just made some points for some of the general points that the admission committee looks for. So first, it is you need at least 2+ years of thesis experience for a PhD. For masters, I think they do 2 years is okay, but for a PhD, if you have more than 2 years, it's very good. Well-written LORs. So I'll come to LORs in the next slide. So next, the essays that display your interest in the field and enthusiasm towards science. So I'll give you some more SOP tips in addition to Sankalpa's tips, and also good academic record. So make sure your grades are good. So grades are not the only determining factor, but there are a lot of your application should be holistic, but having good grades is important. Don't neglect your courses. So it shows, so if you have good grades, it shows potential that you can do well in the university you're going to, and you are going to be competitive there and do well in the courses that you take there. So it's important to have a good academic record. So make sure you have a good CGPA if you're saying a second year or third year and you want to apply for grad school. So typically the application requires a CV. So here you list your educational qualifications and your degree and your CGPA, and then your projects and experiences. And then if you have any publications, and if you're still writing a manuscript and which is going to be published, say within the year, you can include that as well. And then extra projects and academic achievements. So all of these go into your CV. So typically 1 to 2 pages. So I think most of my applications which are submitted required 2 pages CV. Only one program asked for a 1-page CV. So it was really hard to compress everything, but give enough time to have a well-crafted CV. So next is the essays. So I'll get to the essays. So typically it could be one research statement or it could be more than one essay. Next is the transcripts. So the transcripts, when you are submitting the application online for the first time, you just need a PDF copy from the academic section. So it's an unofficial transcript. So once you get admitted to the program, they require an official transcript which has to go from InState. So that can be done later. So just get a PDF copy from ACADS and you can just upload that in your transcript. So make sure you take good courses. So um, I'd say coursework is important. Like for one or two programs that I applied for, I had to list the name of the course, the textbooks that were in the course, the grade I got for the course, and when I took the course. So if you're applying to a particular field, make sure you have good grades in the courses which are related to that field. And so typically when you take 5-level courses, you have course projects, and all of these add value to your academic record. So just don't take chill courses, say GN, or I mean you can take them. It's not that you shouldn't, but don't make your transcript filled with courses that are not attractive to your graduate program. So they are going to look at the courses that you have taken pertaining to which might help you in that particular program and the grades in those programs. So that's important. And next, the LORs. So my next slide is about the LORs. So most of the applications require 3 academic LORs. So this could be from your professors, but in case you have done an industrial intern, I think for masters, you can ask an industry professional, but then again, it should be academic or core-related. Non-core LORs are not going to be accepted. So another thing is it cannot be a general description of what you've done, and it cannot just state that he or she has done this and that, and it's been a good project. And it needs to be really more comprehensive. So the person who's writing your LOR should really know you, and should be able to support in his or her statement your potential for research. So he or she should, the professor should highlight your research inputs, achievements, and also give examples of your qualities or instances where you have performed well. So this is very important. So you need to convey to your professor to write a very detailed LOR. So it just can't be very short. So for that, your professor should really know you well. So make sure that when you're doing projects or internships, you have a good rapport and are in good terms with your professor, because it plays a role when you're applying to grad school. So another thing is, make sure to give enough time for your professor to write the letter. So you don't want them, don't pressurize them in the last week. They have 100 things to worry about. So at least tell them 2 to 3 months in advance that you are applying for grad school and you would need a LOR, say, at the end of the deadline. So this very rarely happens, but it may happen that you need to write your own letter. So in my case, my professors were really nice. All they asked me was for my CV, and they knew me, so I didn't really have to write my letters. One of my professors just asked me for some general points that they wanted in the LOR, and I just gave that in a document, and then they just submitted the LOR themselves. But this has happened to some of my friends where the professor could be really busy, and he or she asks you to write your LOR. So in this case, you need to make sure that it doesn't look like you have written it yourself. And there are many online help tools and blogs which you can look at, and maybe you can ask someone who has been through this process in case you have to write your own letter. But typically profs are nice, and they write your letters. So but it can happen. So, and again, note the number of letters a professor is willing to write. So in my case, I applied to 10 PhD programs, and all the 3 professors wrote all my 10 for all my 10 programs. But in case some profs, very rarely, they might have a limit on the number of letters they are willing to write for you. So you need to make all of this sure before the application starts. So some of them might say, I cannot give you more than 5, or I cannot give you more than 10. That rarely happens. I mean, professors are, they generally encourage you to go to grad school, so but it may or may not happen. And another thing is having a clash with other students applying to the same program. So in my case, it didn't happen because I was applying to biomedical engineering programs, but in case you are working under the same professor, 2 to 3 students are working under the same professor, and you're applying to similar programs. So the prof might not want to recommend 2 students to the same program. So make sure you talk with your friends, talk to the professor, and schedule everything that you don't apply to the same programs, and the same professor is not writing to the same program for students. So you need to resolve all of this. So next is SOP. So I think most of you might have started if you're applying in December or are going to start. So these might be some general tips that might help you if you're when you're writing your SOP. So this is something that shows the university your experience, your interest, and your motivation towards that particular program. So first is to stick to the prompt. So every SOP, when they give you an instruction clearly what they expect, the number of words they expect, and the number of pages. So some of them have say 1,500 words, and some of them say 2 pages. And there are going to be some colleges which say just 1 page. So you need to be able to cut short if you need to make 1 page, and all of this requires a lot of time. So next is to tailor each application according to the university or the program. So mention 2 to 3 professors maximum, not more than 3, and the research in the program that you are interested in. So what interests you from their research, and how you can contribute to their project, and give a rough idea of your future research plans. So this is very important. You just can't write the entire SOP about yourself. You need to tell them what interests you in that university. Next, which is also very important, is explain why the program is a good fit for you and how it will help you in achieving in your goals. So this can typically be the last body of your program. Body of your SOP. Sorry. Next is the major, say the middle portion of your SOP is going to be describing your research experiences. So some of the general questions that you need to ask when you are ask yourself when you're starting to write your SOP is, what did you learn and accomplish in your experiences? What skills did you learn? And how did that internship or research project impact you? How did you grow as a person? How did these different experiences motivate you to apply for this particular program? So don't make it really complicated. Don't use many technical terms, because sometimes the professor might not be working in your subfield and might not be able to understand every term that you mentioned. So try to be straightforward, and it should be easy to read for the admissions committee. Next is to be very specific about your research area. So when you're applying to say biology programs, or even say neuroscience, or in my case biomedical engineering, the field is so vast. So you need to be very specific in that particular domain in what you're interested in if you're applying for a PhD, and in sort of culminate all your experiences and why you have chosen this PhD in that particular area. So this is really important. And next, this is also a very good tip, is to write your own SOP before looking at any other seniors or online SOPs. Start writing on your own. So this is because it is going to help you to be unique and to be true to yourself. So you want the story, the whole story to be about yourself and not somebody else. And you need to be truthful to whatever experiences you have had and why you are choosing this particular field. So that's really important. And yeah, so also your resume, your SOP, and your LOR should complement and support each other. So resume is going to be stating some facts of all these experiences that you've had. Your SOP is going to give you a personal touch of what you have learned, and more of a self-reflection process. And your LOR is going to validate all of these points that are in your SOP and in your resume. So this is also important. So when a person looks at your resume, SOP, and LOR, they should sort of get a holistic view of you as a researcher. Okay. Yeah. Next, it's very important to write well. So ensure a very well-connected essay, free of grammatical and spelling errors. So that's the worst thing to happen, is to have errors in your bad impression on the student, for the committee. So proofread it as many times as you can before submitting, and start writing early. So the earlier you start, the more time you have to give in. And it's an iterative process, because it's going to keep changing, and you have multiple drafts as you go through it. So the earlier, the better. And next is to get your SOP revised. So you can ask family or your friends or your seniors or professors for their opinion. So this is very important. They have already been through this process, or they have an idea of this, so they can give you some tips. So don't be confused with 2 to 3 people whom you trust and you feel comfortable with for their opinion. So next is a personal statement and diversity statement. So sometimes some universities just require this SOP or research statement and do not have these other 2 statements, but sometimes they do appear in some of these applications. So this is slightly different from your SOP or research statement, because I'll tell you how different they are. So first is to look at the instructions and the prompt clearly and what they expect you to write in these statements. So that's really important. So different universities have slightly different instructions. So it's very important to stick to the prompt. So these statements want to know more of who you are and the challenges you overcame as a person. So maybe you had any hardships during your education, or your financial or cultural backgrounds, or some experiences that have molded you and motivated you towards a career in research, and what makes you unique. So this is typically what these statements want to know, apart from you as a researcher. So these are again not present in all applications, but you may see them. And if sometimes they may also ask, if it is, then you can always put forth your high school achievements, your academic achievements, hobbies, positions of leadership, extracurricular activities, volunteering, and social work. So in some of the applications I submitted, these were in separate sections, like the separate boxes where you had to fill in your extracurricular activities and so on. So typically PhD programs, I don't think they really ask you everything, but some of them do, and then you may have to fill in these things. So be sure you have all of them in points, and all of these have word limits in those boxes. So make sure you include all of your stuff, your achievements and your extracurricular activities, in good bullet points, so that you can fit it within that word limit. And next, again, do not repeat points from your SOP if there's another particular research statement. So this should be sort of a different flavor from your SOP. So next is some more tips to narrow down your programs. So first is to look at the research, what kind of research the professors are doing there, how many professors are in that university doing the kind of research you like. So if there's just one person whom you're interested in, I don't think it's a good idea to apply. So ideally, when you look at a university, you need to have at least 2 to 3 researchers, professors whom you're interested in. And also look at the collaborators they have. So if they have a lot of collaborators, it's good for you. I mean, you have different types of projects and interdisciplinary research that you can do in your PhD. So next is the funding. So typically all PhD programs are going to come with funding, but if you're applying for a master's and say you want to see if that particular program is going to give you a TA-ship or RA-ship in your second year, so maybe that's something else that you would want to consider. And then next is a lab culture. So you would want a very supportive PI, and where he or she is going to give you the freedom to do the type of research you want, at the same time give his or her inputs. And also the lab diversity, how people are from different countries. So all these things are also important, because you, at the end of the 4 or 5 years, you want to be happy being in that place. Next is very important also, the opportunities during grad school. So how many seminars can you attend, and are they funding you for conferences when you are in grad school? And during summers, are you allowed to take internships? So all of these are some things that you would want to consider. Also, opportunities after grad school. So say if you want to transition to industry or academia, are they giving you training for that? Or also look at the alumni of the program or alumni from the lab, and look where they are presently and how that program has helped them. You can even get in touch with them. Also the city. So the place of the living, the weather, if it's too cold and you can't manage, and if you want a good city life, a good 4 to 5 experience, and also look at the living expenses in that particular city. So that's maybe the last point, but you may want to consider it. So next is to apply to all your dream programs. So if you really want that particular program and the professor is really good, you should apply it, even if your chances are really less. It might be that you might get into it or you might not, but if you do, it's the best thing that could happen, right? So have a list in ascending order of preference. So you can also apply to two to three really good programs where you have a higher chance of acceptance. So typically, some of them, they also apply for MS programs so that they have a higher chance of selection. Yeah, you can ask other people who have for safe schools, like if they have any. But this is, we could also look at if your seniors are in those programs, and then you are more likely to be accepted. So you can do some research on this as well. So look at the acceptance rate and funding constraints for international students. So I can tell you about the biomedical engineering programs that I applied to. So some of them were large programs. They got 600 to 700 applications per year in PhD, and they took up to say 50 to 60. Among the 50 to 60, there would be only 8 to 10 international students. or some even 500 applicants. And say they took only 20 to 30 students, and among 20 to 30, there could be only 2 international students. So, it's really difficult. So it's a challenge for international students, and the major constraint is the funding, because as an international student, you aren't eligible for the NIH grants or the NSF grants. The major grants are only applicable to US citizens. So that's why the acceptance rates are lower. But you can't really help it. That's the way things are. So next is to apply to the schools that you will definitely attend to. So even if you like the research in some school, you obviously want to get in there, but that doesn't mean the other schools you have applied to, you do not like them. So it's not worth applying to a school unless you have a willingness to go there. You should be able to go. You would be willing to go there if you do not get any other school, because if you don't apply, it's going to be just a waste of time if you do not want to go to that particular school. It's a waste of money and waste of time. So make sure that all the schools that you apply to, you really want to go to them. So next is the general application process. So this is something that I learned only when I was applying. I didn't know this beforehand. So some of the universities in my programs, the programs that I applied to, had a university panel where even though you list 3 professors in your SOP, they might not be looking at your application. There's going to be like 5 to 6 professors in that panel, and they're going to review the applicants and then probably send it to the professor later. Whereas there are some programs that I applied to where my application would directly go to the professor I was interested in. So say this particular professor receives 8 to 10 applicants who are interested, and he or she would choose 1 or 2. So this is typically what happens. Whereas in a university panel, they generally look at overall a pool of applicants, how good you are, and then pick students. So there are 2 types, and it's good to know the program you're applying to, what they follow. Next is going for rotations versus no rotations. So generally when they have a university panel, they have rotations. So rotations are really nice in one way that, you can explore, say, 3 to 4 labs before choosing your major professor. And I think in European universities, they don't have any rotations, or maybe the number of universities that offer rotations are very limited. Whereas in US schools, they do offer a lot of rotation opportunities. And in a way, it's nice. So if you get multiple offers from schools, rather than pick a professor before meeting him or her in person, you might really want to explore the things in the lab, how your experience is going to be. So that way, rotations are nice. So the school I am going to allows 3 to 4 rotations in the first year before choosing major professor. So I'm happy with that. Next is applying to a PhD is really, really costly. So I'll talk about the GRE and how it's optional, but all of these, the GRE, the Toefl, the application fee itself is costly. So sometimes your transcript needs to be, because we have a 10 CGPA scale, they might want it in a 4 CGPA scale, which is which the US schools follow. So you have to there are some online sites which do this for you and you need to pay them. So this is another thing that you need to worry about. So GRE is really optional, made optional now at least for most of the PhD programs. So some of them state upfront, in their application website that we do not accept GRE scores. Some of them say, it's optional, you may or may not submit your GRE scores. And some of them may require it, but I'm not sure of any programs like that. At least the programs I applied to did not require GRE. So make sure to look at the programs beforehand so that you know if you need to take a GRE or not. And next is a Toefl. So all of these schools that I applied to, many of them require the Toefl score. Again, there's another exam called IELTS. So make sure which one is accepted by your university. I think for US, if you write Toefl, it's enough. So maybe I'm not sure of European universities, but it's good to find out. Next, the application fee. It is expensive, and I'll talk about how to get waivers. So on average, I think per college, if you convert to Indian rupees, it could be between 8,000 to 12,000 rupees, somewhere between that per university. So if you're applying to, say, 10 schools, you can imagine how expensive the application process itself is. So, make sure that you're financially independent. If you're doing a TA, you can save that money to apply to schools. That's another thing that you can do. So now talking about fee waivers. So some of these universities have webinars and information sessions. So if you attend that session, they'll give you this particular code because you attended that session and you get a waiver. So I think 2 or 3 programs I attended a session, say like somewhere in September or October, and they provided me with a code, and I didn't have to pay the application fee. So then those are really helpful. But for this, you need to be really attentive and look at the websites right now. And another useful point would be this mentor match. So I think two programs I applied to had this, where they had this Google form which you had to submit, say, in September or October, and they would connect you to a PhD student already admitted to that program. So he or she can tell you more about the application process and some things which are very specific to the university. This is also very useful. So all of this, you need to do your research very well. Next, yeah, talk with people in labs of your interest. So if you can get in touch. If you have Insti people, it's even more easier, but I think people would respond if you want to know the type of research, lab environment, and types of projects and so on. It's helpful. Yeah, so find out if people from Insti are there or already have done their PhD. It's more easier to get information that way. Yeah, so another thing is create the accounts in the university websites very early, because so I think most of the applications online, they would be open by August, September. So once you create an account, you already know what the application requires. So you can cater your time to each university based on this. So next, after all of this, and once you get selected to the first round of your application process, is the interviews. So right now, you shouldn't be really worrying about your interviews. You should have a good application, good SOP, and make sure you get through the first process. The interviews are the next round, where you can talk to, say, Sankalpa, me, and all of the other seniors, Sowmya and Kiruthika, who will be giving the talks about how they went about the interviews. Maybe that can be for another talk, or you can email us. So these, I think for masters, they don't have interviews. Generally for PhD only they take interviews. Next is important is mailing professors. So if you're a PhD student and you want to apply for labs, it's always better to mail the professors beforehand, because there's no harm in mailing. So you may receive a reply, or you may not receive a reply, but it's always better. So some of them were really nice. Like at least many professors I asked and inquired about the research. You need to have a good mail firsthand. So you need to talk about how you are interested in your research and that you are applying as a PhD student and your background. So if you have, if you display genuine interest, the professor would be willing to reply to you. So this is useful because the professor might tell you about if he or she is taking new students. So sometimes the lab is full and there's no funding. That professor, even though you're a good student, they might not take you because there's no space. So that can happen, and it's good to know beforehand, because then it's not not worth to apply to that university if 2 to 3 professors have labs full and they're not willing to fund you. So this is helpful if you mail the professors beforehand. And so it could happen that you are selected for an interview and they will remember you from your email. So you already have first step of communication with them. So and they might have a good impression on you from your email. So it's always good to email the professor. So don't mail more than one professor from that particular university, because they tend to talk among themselves. So if at least mail one professor from one university you are interested in. So if most of them do reply, but yeah, some of them don't. So summarizing everything towards the end of the presentation, some general important tips is start early. So don't underestimate the time it's going to take. It's a really time-consuming process. Doing all the research and even applying and on the portals, it takes a lot of time and effort. So do good research on the graduate programs, professors, funding, and before picking your final list of schools. This is really important. Yeah, be organized and keep track of all the deadlines and be prompt. So you can have an Excel sheet where you typically make a list of schools, the requirements, and all the deadlines. That way you won't miss out on information. And be in contact with someone who has been through this process. It's really helpful if you know someone, and even your family or your friend, who can support you through this application process, because it can be really draining for the person to take it alone. So be with someone who can support you. So coming to the end of my talk, so the entire experience is very iterative. It's a great learning process, because you'll learn about different research, the types of research professors are doing, about the professors, about the programs themselves. It's also a self-reflection process, because you look at your experiences, the type of research that you have done, and what you want to do in the future. So it's also challenging because it's so competitive, and it's also nerve-biting, because once you submit your applications, you're all waiting for that, for the results to come. So that way it's very nerve biting, and it's also rewarding. So towards the end when you get your offer. So if you have any, so that's the end of the presentation. So if you have any questions, you can email me or you can email Sankalpa on any of, so my batch has like so many students who are applied for grad schools. You can get in contact with any of us. So if you have questions specific to biomedical engineering programs or medical physics programs, you can ask me, you can email me, so I can talk to you about it. So that's the end of my presentation. If you have any questions, I think Sankalpa and I can answer.
Thank you so much for the wonderful talk, Sankalpa and Roshini. So, I hope you have cleared many of their doubts. If still, if any of you have any doubts, please feel free to ask them.
It's okay, don't be shy. Like,
Yeah.
absolutely anything you want to talk about.
How do we ask for tailored recommendations? Okay, I can go ahead and then maybe Sankalpa can put in. So, typically profs, most of my profs, they asked for a CV and they really knew me well, so they could probably comment on other aspects of how good a researcher you are. But if you want specific points or specific instances to be mentioned in your CV, you can put in a PDF. Tell your prof that you want these things to be mentioned. It's okay. The professor will understand. He or she wouldn't take it wrongly. So put that in a PDF, and then the final SOP is left to the professor, because it's anonymous to you. Because when you just enter your professor's email ID on the application portal, and the link to submit the recommendation goes to the professor directly. So in that way, you really can't see what the professor has written, but you can make sure that your professor is going to write good about you if you have done good research and good work. So you shouldn't worry about that.
Yeah, Roshni is absolutely right. Like your prof, if you're getting an LOR from them after having worked with them for a while, is probably going to write good things about you. So, like the way I tailored it specifically was depending on what my so in my SOPs, I chose to highlight only certain aspects of the project. So when I requested three professors to write my LOR, in the email what I asked them, I just some points. So I basically reminded them that I did this TA-ship with them, or I worked as an NPTEL TA, and it would be helpful to mention that I also like so I have the TA-ship qualifications, that kind of mentorship. I spoke about taking initiative on a project, things like that. So, but it basically just came down to seeing what complemented my SOP, and if there was something that I couldn't specifically highlight, but it sounded better coming from a prof, I just requested them to write about it by emailing them. But yeah, like if you're close to a prof, you can do it. If you feel iffy about doing it, then it's up to you. But it really is a function of your relationship with the professor. And if you feel like you're on good terms with them, then you can ask them to tailor your recommendations like that. And some programs do value teaching experience, and they want you to have, so up to you.
Hi, I have a question. So, like, obviously, the programs can get very competitive and all, but so in terms of, so obviously, there's a scope for quite a bit of randomness, I guess, like as I think Sankalpa mentioned. And so, in terms of CV and SOP for any program, what can be done to sort of deal with and reduce that randomness? Very vague question, but yeah. I mean.
Yeah, okay. So it can happen. So it happened to me. I had very disoriented projects, and to get into my final project, it can happen that you've not worked in the same field for say 3 years. You jump from different projects. Um, I think you need to sort of build it up like a story. Try to connect different projects, but your final goal when you're applying to that program. I mean, you need to be really sure why you're applying. You at least need to make the admissions committee sure why you're applying. If your SOP isn't really convincing, I don't think it shows it's a good impression on you. If you're if, there can't be like so much randomness that you aren't sure why you're applying. That can't happen. Yeah, I don't know if
So I
that is a
think,
question. Yeah, Sankalpa can go ahead.
yeah, so maybe adding on to that, like one way I tried to make sure that my application materials made sense for the program was to really read and dissect the descriptions that they have for that grad school. So usually like their description of how they're talking about their research, their projects, and everything on their website can be a very good indicator of what they're expecting. So, some of them will like point blank mention that, or like if you like stalk the students who've gotten into the programs, you can see that they come from a specific background. The way that they've written their descriptions of their research can give you a good idea of how you should be talking about your research and like what broad overarching themes you can use to connect things. For example, I also had like very different types of projects because I experimented a lot. But I think my broad overarching theme was I sold my computational biology background and skills, and the fact that I've worked on problems in different contexts, but the kind of methodologies that I've used have been very quantitative. So, that was one of my unifying themes. So, in your statements, if you have a theme like that, and if the theme resonates with the program, then I think your odds are better.
There's this
Okay, thanks.
question. Does the reputation of the prof from whom you get the LOR matter? I think it does. So at least in my case, it did. So if the professor is a very famous professor and the schools you're applying to, they know that professor. So if you have a foreign intern and that professor is known to other professors, it does help because a good word from them definitely increases your chances. Not that if a good LOR from say a prof which who's not well known to that particular committee is going to be bad. It's not worse or anything like that. But I think it definitely increases your chances if it's from a prof whom they know. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I strongly echo that. Like during my interviews in multiple places, I had interviews with profs who were like, "Oh, you worked with so and so.
Yes, it
I know
happens.
Angela from this place. I know John from this place." Or, "Oh, you worked at the Max Planck. We really like this program, this aspect of that program, or like they've been there." So it gives them something very relatable about your application. So if you're in your second, third year and you're not applying for grad school now, it can be helpful to get that foreign research experience, not just for the LOR. Like the LOR does have weight because, like, they'll kind of know the professors more, or, it doesn't really matter if the professor is like a prof from abroad, but can be a big shot in any field. But having that foreign research experience can also help you figure out whether you want to go to research in a foreign country. Because working in a lab in the US or in Europe, the way that they work is a bit different, and the environment is different, the community is different, and so that experience can be really valuable, and it can also add to the kind of things that you can highlight on your application in terms of the kind of people you've interacted with, the kind of scientific environment you've been in. It's kind of like saying that, okay, like I want to go here and I know a lot about what here is going to be like.
Hello. Hi guys. I have one more question. So in the SOPs which have a 500 to 750-ish word limit, how important is the extracurriculars or our outreach stuff? Like, do we need to put it in one paragraph?
Uh, I don't think it's more of your research. If they have another personal statement, then you can include it. But if you do want to include academic, say academic outreach, then you can. But focus more on your research and why you want to be a good fit to that program and what interests you in that program. That's more important than the extracurricular stuff in your SOP, at least for a PhD.
Yeah, if the program has a 500 to 750 word limit, like see whether they have a diversity statement or like some other statement or like additional space. So if they have something there and you have like if it's a diversity statement, then you can talk about your extracurriculars there. If it's like some other like financial impact kind of statement, if you're only coming from that kind of background, you can talk about it there. And if they don't have any additional statement and it's just 500 words, I would say go by what the program seems to value on their website. If one of their things that they value a lot is like collaboration or something like that, then while most of your SOP should be about your research and whatnot, like in your concluding paragraph you can write about teams or community or something that makes you unique for that program, because of a particular extracurricular, you are a certain kind of person and that makes you a good fit for that program. So only if you can contextualize it like that, but I would say probably if it doesn't make sense, then don't include it. Also, when it comes to shorter, like 500, 700 word type SOPs, like I found it easier to write my like big SOP and then edit it down to 500 words later. Like I just picked and chose like paragraphs and like edited it so it became 500 words.
So about that, so adding on to what Shashank asked about the multiple like different fields if you've worked in and what Sankalpa said. So if you have a lot of like diverse projects which don't like really have a connecting statement, but you know that one of those projects is what ties very well with the SOP. So in these 500-ish word statements, do we typically focus more on that one project and just like very briefly one line explain about the others, or do we equally give weightage to all?
So
yeah, okay, go ahead.
I wrote one 500 word essay for Cold Spring Harbor Lab, and what I chose to do there was I focused on two projects, and I wrote like a full paragraphs about them because I wanted both of those paragraphs to showcase different kind of skills. And the third project I like edited it down to just a sentence or so. So I would say if there's only one project that's very relevant to the program, like focus on it more, and you can use the other projects as more like introductory material or to show that you have specific experience that's useful. Maybe if it's wet lab experience, then say you got those skills, or if it's some kind of analysis experience, like how that skill ties into the program. So
yeah, I think she answered it really well. So if it's really relevant to your program, then you should explain that project more. If that's the sort of research that you'll be doing forward, I think you need to give more importance to that project. And the other projects can be mentioned, but maybe in less detail if you have a constrained word space. Yeah.
Okay, thanks guys.
Hi, one slight more generic question again. So, did either of you consider applying to Europe? And
Sankalpa didn't. I didn't.
Why
Yeah.
didn't? Okay. Any reasons why? Like glaringly, no Europe.
Nothing like that. There are really good professors and research groups that I saw in Europe as well. But I think I wanted to apply not more than 10. So I think my top schools were all in the US. And yeah, I think I wanted to go to the US rather than Europe. I think the biomedical industry is really booming there. Even in Europe it is, not that it's not, but it's more in the labs were, I think I like them more in US. So I think I just stuck to it. And another thing is the rotations. I wanted to do rotations. I think I applied to US schools because they have rotations and European schools don't. And again, in European schools, another issue is the funding. So some programs are like US programs where you don't have to really worry. the university is going to cover you or the professor is going to cover you. But some of the European programs that I know, you have to submit a separate university application and a separate grant or funding application. And I think I really didn't want to do that. It's another additional job to apply for funding, and so US universities are much easier that way. You don't have to worry about the additional funding issue.
So I did apply to a couple of places in Europe. Um, I think it was mostly a function of the fact that I was confused. Like I was confused about US versus Europe because like Roshni was saying, there are lots of good labs in Europe, but I also had the same hesitation about rotations. So it's not strictly true. So like in the UK, Oxford and Cambridge, I think they have rotations for some at least like checked a few that had rotations. And we also have like different structures of mentorship. Like in the UK, I spoke to a professor from Oxford who was saying that it's compulsory that you need to have two PIs to do a project. So you won't have like just one guide, but it's program mandated for you to have two guides. Whereas in like other places, it's obviously not the same. The advantage with European applications is that in a lot of places their cycle happens twice a year. So EMBL, EPFL, ETH Zurich, all of them have a November round and then they have like an April, May round. So if you're not very sure about European PhDs, you can also take a call on it later. Happy with your grad school admit from the US, or if it hasn't worked out the way you wanted to, you still have time to apply for European PhD programs in the April May cycle. So that's something to keep in mind. But I would say that the important difference for Europe is that while there are some PhD programs like the EMBL International PhD program, the Francis Crick program, the programs at Oxford and Cambridge, a lot of like basically almost all of their programs do direct admits. So, you can write to a professor and maybe they'll interview you once or twice and you can be admitted. And this has its own pros and cons. This means you join a direct lab, you don't have the backing of a program. So it can get messy if your relationship with the PI, doesn't work out. You're very tied to this one person as the sole source of your. So some things to think about if you're considering European PhDs.
Nice. Thank you.
Also, like specifically for European PhDs, as Roshni was saying, the funding is different, but it's also less generous in some cases. Like for UK, the PhD student funding is actually really bad. In the US, in most places, you can like live off your stipend and save a little, but in the UK, you basically like spend all of your stipend and it might not be necessarily enough. Germany is a bit nicer with their PhD stipend, Switzerland also. I've heard that it can really vary in France, so keep that in mind as well.
Yeah, and if you're applying for masters, I've heard in Germany your tuition fee is completely waived. You just need to pay for your living. Whereas in US, the masters programs are really, really expensive. So it might be hard if you're not doing investment or a loan. You need to consider that as well.
Any more questions? I think that's it for today. Thanks for joining again.
No issues. And if you guys want like any more specific help or if you have more questions, like feel free to text or email. And if we get busy and forget to respond, like don't be shy about sending reminders. Sometimes we just like miss emails and messages.
Share the slides with Renuka or
Yeah, that's really helpful.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
So one more thing I forgot to mention. So I think last year our seniors had given us this link with some useful blogs and resources. So I think Sankalpa, Sowmya, and Kiruthika and myself, I think we've added some maybe more links. We can create a drive link with all these useful blogs and send it to you, and then you can circulate it. So that might also help.
Sure, we will do that.